little temple can be found among some of the old back streets of Hung Hom, an area which 60, 70, 80 years ago was renowned for its shipyard. However, today I'd like to talk to you about the accomplished novelist Greene, who built up a highly respected reputation during his career. In fact, his books can be found in shops, libraries and centres for learning all over the globe. In fact, many of his books went on to become very successful films which could be enjoyed on the silver screen. His work covered stories in South America, Vienna, West Africa, Haiti. These are just some of the areas which featured in this work. And of course, then there is Havana. At the height of the Cold War, he visited Cuba under Batista, and later, after the revolution, under the rule of Fidel Castro. It is fair to say he never hid his preferences. In the early 60s, Cuba was strapped for cash. So was Britain under Macmillan. Yet the Caribbean nation approached Leyland Motor Company to discuss the possible acquisition of a fleet of 400 vehicles if the British could see their way to approving export credit backing. If all went to plan, there was an option for a further 1,000 buses. This was an $11 million deal, which is actually over 90 million in today's terms. Sometimes it pays to be audacious. Keep in mind, this was not long after the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Kennedy administration was doing everything possible to ensure a watertight trade blockade. Then JFK was assassinated. In stepped Lyndon Ben Johnson, and he wanted to lay down the law, so to speak. However, the British Financial Department appeared philosophically opposed to an economic blockade for political purposes. The diplomats would be left to feel the wrath of Washington. American displeasure was best avoided, but they were loath to assist in toppling Castro. A political war of words ensued. Richard Austin Butler, better known as Rab, the then British Foreign Secretary, travelled to Washington to discuss the matter with Lyndon Ben Johnson, who is said to have bawled at Rab that ties with America should be a matter of political priority, and even went as far as to wave a bunch of dollar notes around, proclaiming that he would personally buy out the contract rather than let the detested Castro complete the deal. The case was then debated in Westminster. Greene even persuaded a Labour MP to speak in favour of trade with Cuba in the House of Commons. To Washington's disgust, the contract was honoured, and Alec Douglas Hugh was, by then, the Prime Minister. The next step was, of course, trying to secure transportation for the transatlantic voyage for the buses. Western Europe, not wishing to raise American ire, turned their back on all requests. Sending an appeal to Moscow would be seen as further political provocation. Out of the blue, an East German shipping company offered support in the shape of a vessel known as the MV Magdeburg. Naturally enough, I'm sure many of you viewers probably anticipated a far from successful ending. You will not be disappointed to hear what prevailed. Not long after Rab Butler's futile trip to Washington, Greene himself wrote to the Cuban ambassador in London to dot the I's and cross the T's, as it were. At one stage, it seemed he might even accompany the buses himself and sail across the Atlantic. They had found a slight gap in the policy of economic isolation aimed at bringing communist Cuba to its knees. Everything changed, however, in October 1964. Just as an outbound East German boat left the docks on the Thames, it was struck by an inbound Japanese vessel. Despite the very clear weather. To this day, certain conspiracy theorists cannot help but feel the possibility of CIA hands at work.